During a snowstorm, my neighbor dumped snow into my driveway, then reported me for not clearing it. Got me fined $900 and branded a safety risk. But when I caught him stealing power from my outlet, I set a timer to shut it off mid-use and reported him. I was standing at my front window, coffee in hand, watching the snow come down so heavy it looked like the world was being erased. It was one of those freak buffalo blizzards, thick, wet flakes stacking up inches by the minute. You couldn't see 5 feet ahead. I just finished shoveling the small patch that led to my porch when I saw my neighbor, Rick, across the property line. He wasn't just clearing his driveway. He was launching it. Each scoop of his snowblower sent a full spray right into my driveway, burying the part I'd already cleared. I ran out, yelling over the engine, "Hey, you're dumping that on my side." Rick didn't even pause. He looked up at me through his goggles, lifted a gloved hand, and said, "It's just snow. Relax." Then he turned his machine and aimed another wave directly at my fence. I ended up spending the next hour trying to dig myself out again, but it was hopeless. Every gust of wind seemed to carry more of his mess back onto my property. I gave up, soaked to the bone, my arms shaking, and went inside. 2 days later, when the storm cleared, I woke up to a bright orange violation notice stuck to my door. Failure to maintain sidewalk in safe condition. Fine, $900. I thought it had to be a mistake. I called the city, explained that I had cleared it, that my neighbor's snowblower had pushed it back over. The woman on the phone just sighed and said, "We got a report from your neighbor that your sidewalk was impassable. We sent an inspector. It's documented." That's when I realized Rick had reported me. The same guy who buried me in his slush had called me in as a hazard. When I confronted him that evening, he was out front scraping ice off his SUV. "You reported me?" I said. "After you dumped half your driveway on mine?" He looked at me with that smug, thin smile of his, the one that made you want to break something, and said, "You should have thought ahead. You know how the city is about safety. Some of us plan better than others." I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my voice steady. "You think this is funny?" He shrugged. "Not my problem if you can't handle a little snow." I wish I could say I walked away. I wish I could say I let it go. But I didn't. Not after that smirk. Not after that fine. Because a week later, when the snow started to melt, I noticed something strange. An extension cord, barely visible under the slush, running from my outdoor outlet to the side of his garage. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the line was buried from something old. But when I followed it, my jaw clenched. It went straight into his garage wall under the siding. That's when I realized Rick wasn't just a petty jerk. He was stealing my electricity. And right there, standing in that freezing, dripping yard, I came up with a plan. A plan that started with a simple timer. Rick moved into the house next door about 2 years before the snowstorm. The neighborhood was quiet. Mostly older couples, a few families who'd been there forever. I'd bought my place after my divorce because it was affordable and had a big enough garage for the woodshop I was trying to build up. At first, I tried to be friendly. I brought him beer when he moved in, helped him carry a washer up his icy steps, even let him borrow my ladder once. He was one of those guys who smiled just enough to seem polite, but his eyes stayed flat the whole time, always sizing you up like he was deciding how much he could take before you noticed. Then little things started happening. He accidentally parked too close to my driveway so I couldn't get out. His trash cans would somehow end up tipped over into my yard on pickup days. He'd run his leaf blower on Sunday mornings at 6 a.m., right outside my bedroom window. The final straw before the snowstorm was summer. I came home from work one evening to find my sprinkler system torn apart, like someone had yanked the hoses out and stomped them. When I asked him if he'd seen anyone near it, he said, "Maybe the neighborhood kids did it," and then added, "You really should put up cameras." That stuck with me. You should put up cameras. So I did. Cheap ones, Amazon specials, but they worked. I mounted one over my garage, one pointed at the driveway, and one by the side of the house where the electrical outlet was. It wasn't about catching him. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't crazy. Fast forward to winter. I hadn't paid much attention to the footage in months, But after I found that cord running from my outlet into his garage, I went through the clips. And there it was, Rick at 2:17 a.m. one night in early December, wearing a hoodie and headlamp, crouching by my siding, plugging the cord in. He looked around twice, then covered it with a little pile of snow. I checked my electric bill history next. My usage had spiked by about 40% since November. That smug bastard had been running something, heaters, tools, maybe his whole garage, off my power for months. When I confronted him again, I decided not to mention what I'd seen yet. I just said, "Hey, weird question. Did you plug something into my outlet?" He gave me that same condescending smirk. "Why would I need to? I pay my bills." Then, without missing a beat, he added, "You should get that checked. Could be faulty wiring. Wouldn't want your house catching fire." That line, it wasn't random. It was a threat dressed like advice. So I smiled right back. "You're right," I said. "I'll look into it." But I didn't call an electrician. I went to Home Depot, bought a heavy-duty programmable outlet timer, and installed it on that outdoor plug. Then I set it to shut off exactly at 2 a.m. every night and turn back on at 5 a.m. I didn't tell a soul. I wanted to see what he'd do when the power disappeared right in the middle of whatever he was secretly running. And 3 nights later, I found out. At 2:37 a.m. on a Thursday, I woke up to a loud bang. Something metallic, then a muffled curse that carried through the snow. I checked the camera feed on my phone, half asleep, and there he was. Rick, in his slippers and a parka, storming out of his garage with a flashlight. He followed the cord back toward my outlet, yanking on it like he was trying to pull it free. I watched him stomp around, scanning the ground, clearly confused about why his power had cut off. After a minute, he disappeared back inside. A few minutes later, I saw light flicker through his garage window, then nothing. Complete darkness. I lay there, heart pounding, staring at the live feed until I finally fell back asleep. The next morning, I acted normal, shoveled my steps, waved politely as he came out to scrape his windshield. He didn't wave back. By the 3rd night, I could tell the power cut was messing with him. I saw him come out again, this time with a portable work light and a small toolbox. He crouched by my outlet for nearly 15 minutes, unscrewing the cover, poking at wires, clearly trying to figure out why his free electricity wasn't working. He was so bold, he didn't even care that it was my property. That's when I realized this wasn't about convenience for him. It was control. He enjoyed crossing boundaries, just to watch how far he could push before I snapped. I kept the timer going every night. Every time it shut off, his garage would go black. Every time it came back on at 5 a.m., he'd pretend nothing had happened. But a few days later, something changed. One morning, I woke up to find a set of deep shovel marks across my driveway. Clean edges, fresh, like someone had dug through the snow at 3 a.m. My security camera footage showed exactly that. Rick, bundled up, shoveling in total silence. Only he wasn't clearing his own side. He was carving a path through mine. It didn't make sense until I zoomed out. The path led directly from his back door to my fuse box. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just a game anymore. He wasn't trying to annoy me. He was trying to sabotage me, maybe even scare me off the property. I called the non-emergency police line, explained the situation, showed them the footage. The officer looked bored. "Your neighbors. These disputes get messy," he said. "If there's no damage or physical threat, we can't really intervene." Rick must have seen the patrol car outside because later that night, he stood on his porch staring at my house. When I finally looked out, he smirked, gave a lazy little wave, and mouthed, "You can't stop me." It was freezing that night, the kind of cold that makes every breath feel sharp. I sat there for hours, staring out the window, replaying everything. The snow, the fine, the cord, that smirk. That's when the idea for real revenge started forming. I wasn't just going to shut his power off. I was going to make him pay for every single smug word and every ounce of trouble he'd caused me. And all I needed was one more piece of evidence to make it perfect. I was ready to burn his house down in my head. Not literally, but I wanted to torch every smug notch in that face of his until it was just a memory. Then I remembered the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Delgado. had a Ring camera pointed at the corner where Rick's driveway met my sidewalk. I'd asked her once if it would mind capturing the street during storms. She'd said no. She liked seeing the neighborhood. I asked if she could check footage from the day of the citation. She sent me a 10-minute clip and I watched it at 2x speed like a man watching a slow-motion punchline. Rick walks up my path at 9:17 a.m., barefoot in slippers with a coffee cup, like he's going for a Sunday stroll. He stops at my corner, pulls out his phone and dials. 15 seconds later, a city vehicle turns the corner. The inspector, the same one whose name was on the notice, gets out, clipboard in hand, hair flat from a hat, and they start walking my sidewalk together. Not separately, together. Rick is animated, pointing. The inspector jots things down. Rick looks at the camera, straight at Mrs. Delgado's ring, and gives that same tight, slow smile. My stomach dropped. I scrubbed forward. They linger by my porch and Rick bends low, like he's checking something, and the inspector snaps a picture with his phone. He writes notes, stamps his clipboard, and then, the part that made me want to smash my phone, he hands the clipboard to Rick. Rick signs it. The inspector leaves. Rick stands there, clipboard under his arm. The same expression he'd worn when he watched me shovel snow into my own driveway, as if he'd just closed a deal. I called the city about 30 seconds after I stopped shaking. "Hi, I think one of your inspectors is colluding with my neighbor," I said. The line landed me in a bureaucracy maze. I tossed my phone on the couch and pulled up the app for the local code enforcement office. I typed the inspector's badge number into Google out of spite. Half an hour later, I had screenshots of the inspector's LinkedIn profile. Small-town code officer, 3 years on the job, always listed as community-minded. I printed the Ring footage and circled timestamps like a madman, then emailed them to the inspector's supervisor. "This footage appears to show collusion," I wrote, which is as calm as I could be on paper. I hit send and waited for satisfaction. Nothing. The reply was a generic, "We'll investigate." That was it. Investigate. Like that was a satisfying word. But I couldn't stop. I dove deeper into my security footage again that night and found something else. Something I didn't expect. Behind Rick, following at a distance, was a tall guy I'd never seen before. He wasn't local. He wore a contractor's jacket and kept his head down. He moved like he belonged there. When Rick signed the inspector's clipboard, the contractor slipped something into Rick's hand. A folded business card. Rick pocketed it like a man who had just been handed a key. The card had a company name I recognized from the area, North Shore Renovations. I'd seen their vans at auctions. I'd seen their flyers tacked to telephone poles. But the way the man handed the card? It wasn't business casual. It was a transaction. All at once the pattern snapped into place. The blown sprinkler. The leaf blower nights. The perfect tip to the city on the exact morning after the storm. Rick wasn't just a petty neighbor. He was running a small, ugly racket. Complain, get a property flagged, let contractors, friends, offer remediation or safety repairs at premium prices. Make your house look unsafe, then sell the solution to you. Or worse, push owners into desperation, drive them to sell, then buy cheap. I felt sick. This wasn't individual malice anymore. This was organized exploitation. The man who'd smiled at me when I helped him move in was profiting off other people's rules. And he'd handed the card right in front of my house. For the first time, the fine felt less like an accident and more like a deliberate, scalpel-precise piece of cruelty. I'd been targeted. And whoever that contractor was had my number now, and apparently a pipeline to the city. I sat there with the footage looping, a slow, cold rage replacing the trembling. I couldn't call the cops and expect miracles. The city did nothing when a code officer signed with a neighbor. But two facts were now undeniable. He'd orchestrated the complaint, and he was connected to people who could profit from my misfortune. I shoved the printed frames into an envelope, then stopped. If this was a racket, hitting him where it hurt might require more than footage and a complaint. It would require planning. I closed my laptop and opened my toolbox. I set the timer on my phone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold. The Ring footage looped on my laptop, and a list of ways to make Rick pay that all sounded either petty or pathetic. I wanted something cleaner than hitting his tires or dumping his mail in the street. I wanted a revenge that would feel like justice, precise, unavoidable, and public. First rule I set for myself: don't do anything that would make me look like the villain. If he had a handful of neighbors nodding along to his smirk, I needed the town to see the facts, not my temper. So I wrote down everything I already had. Timestamped video of him plugging into my outlet, footage of him signing a code inspector's clipboard, the contractor handing him a card, the fine notice, my phone bill with the spike in usage, a timeline. It was boring but solid. Facts beat fury every day. Second rule: escalate in a way that exposed the racket, not just embarrassed one man. If Rick's model was create a problem, sell the solution, I needed to pull back the curtain on the whole show. That meant getting the contractor on camera, getting the inspector supervisor to admit there'd been unusual contact, and, if I could swing it, getting a city official to walk into the story publicly. A formal complaint that sat in some inbox did nothing. I needed witnesses, statements, and pressure. I started small and legal. I sent a certified letter to the code enforcement office with a printout of the footage and a formal request for an investigation. I made sure to CC the mayor's office and the local paper's city editor. Bureaucracies hate paper trails. Then I called Mrs. Delgado and asked if she'd be willing to hand over raw footage if I brought over a thumb drive. She said yes without a second thought. She'd never liked Rick's late-night leaf blowing either. Small victory. Next, I staged what I called a discovery. I created a fake profile on a local homeowners forum, nothing flashy, just a middle-aged guy looking for emergency basement repair recommendations after a storm. I posted about a hypothetical problem in a house 2 streets over, and within a day a handful of local contractors replied. One of them used the exact business name from the card. I messaged that account asking for an estimate and included a phone number that went to a burner I bought. Felt like lying, but I told myself it was research. They called within minutes. The guy on the line was friendly, too familiar, the kind of voice that had been around the neighborhood business loop for years. He offered a special rate if the job was urgent and cash paid up front. That phrase, cash up front, was the smell of the whole thing. I booked a meeting at a time when I knew Rick would be home, noon on a Saturday, so I could see how they interacted. My plan was simple: show up as the homeowner in need, let the contractor offer the canned solution, record everything on my phone. Then, if Rick showed, record him taking the bait. I told myself over and over, no illegal traps, no sabotage, no confrontation that could blow back. I wanted a paper trail, witnesses, recorded admissions. I wanted Mrs. Delgado's footage, the contractor's estimate in writing, and the inspector to have to explain why he'd handed a clipboard and been seen with a resident minutes before filing an official report. If the city ignored it, I'd hand the package to the paper and the local TV station. Public pressure would be harder to bury than one upset neighbor's complaint. Part of me, the part that walked out of the house the night after the fine, fists clenched, wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone. The rest of me wanted to be smarter, to spend my dignity like a resource and use it to build something better than instant gratification. I set a second rule: keep my face calm, my tone reasonable, and my phone rolling. The weekend I picked had a forecast for cold rain and a chance of sleet. Perfect. People who make money off disaster show up when things get bad. I packed a second phone, a spare battery, and Mrs. Delgado's thumb drive with the ring footage. I slipped the contractor's card into my pocket like a prop, told myself I was only a man trying to defend his home, and drove over 2 streets to a house I didn't own. I told myself this would be discovery, evidence, truth. I didn't expect what happened next. The house I picked for the meeting was a half-finished rental, old siding, for sale sign leaning sideways, no one living there yet. I parked out front, pretending to be the new owner in need of repairs. The sleet had just started, tiny silver needles hitting my windshield, and I could see my breath in the cab. At exactly noon, a white van pulled up behind me. North Shore Renovations. Same logo, same colors, same name from the card. The driver's door opened, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't just the contractor from the footage. Rick got out of the passenger side. He wasn't wearing work gear, just jeans, a heavy jacket, and that same smug smile. "Hey man," the contractor called out. "You the guy with the basement issue?" I nodded, pretending to fumble with my phone. "Yeah, water damage. Think the foundation's shot." Rick hung back, scanning the street. Noticed me for a second too long. I kept my hood up. The contractor, his name tag said Gary, walked me to the back of the house, talking about some pumps and ceiling costs. When we reached the old foundation hatch, Rick crouched and pretended to inspect something. Then Gary dropped the line that made my blood freeze. "Your code violation on record means the city's already flagged your address, right?" he said casually. "We can help you clear it. Get the paperwork waived if you act fast. My partner handles that kind of thing." He nodded at Rick. "Partner." That's when I realized Rick wasn't working with these people. He was one of them. The whole thing, snow, fines, even the stolen power, wasn't random. He'd been running the same scam under his own name, using his property next door to manipulate inspections and steer homeowners toward his partner company for repairs that weren't needed. I played dumb. "So how does that work?" I asked, keeping my phone angled down so the camera caught everything. Gary smiled like it was the easiest thing in the world. "Simple. We get you an estimate. Rick here submits a neighbor affidavit saying he noticed a safety concern, and the inspector clears the citation once we file proof of repair. Cuts red tape." Rick added, "Plus it boosts your property value. Everyone wins." I almost laughed. I wanted to throw up instead. I acted interested, kept asking questions, names, prices, details. The whole pitch took 12 minutes, all recorded. When I asked for a written quote, Gary scribbled one on a clipboard and signed his name. Rick's signature was already printed in the witness box. It was all pre-filled. They'd done this before. I took the paper, shook their hands, and said I'd think about it. Rick squinted, like something was off, but I kept my hood low and walked back to my car. The minute I closed the door, my heart started pounding so loud I could hear it over the sleet. Back home, I dumped the footage onto my laptop, synced it with Mrs. Delgado's video and the old clips from my cameras. The pattern was undeniable. Dates, times, names, proof of financial interest. It wasn't just petty harassment, it was fraud, city-level corruption. But before I could even upload the files to a cloud drive, my power flickered, then went completely out. At first, I thought it was the storm, but when I stepped outside, my heart stopped. Rick was standing by my side fence, flashlight in hand, crouched over my fuse box. I yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" And he bolted into his garage. I ran after him, slipping on the ice, but by the time I reached his driveway, the garage door slammed shut. A second later, every light in his house came on. Mine stayed black. It took me 20 minutes to get the breaker back up and another 10 to find the extension cord he'd ripped out and tossed into a snowbank. When I finally got inside, my cameras were dead. The power cut had reset them. The only thing that still worked was the backup battery in my laptop and my recordings. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In one of the clips from the meeting, as Gary handed me the clipboard, Rick's phone screen lit up for half a second. On it was a picture of my house. But not the outside, the inside, taken through a window. There was only one way he could have gotten that shot. He'd been inside before. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me jump. The idea that Rick had been inside my house, that was a different kind of fear. It wasn't just about money or territory anymore. It was about invasion, violation. At 3 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through every security clip I'd saved before the power cut. I slowed one video down, the earliest one, from when I first installed the cameras. That's when I saw it. A shadow by my back porch one night in late November. The door handle jiggled, the frame moved slightly, and the shadow disappeared. The next morning, when I went to check my tools, one was missing. A voltage tester I assumed I'd misplaced. But now I realized it hadn't been lost. It had been borrowed. I had to know what he was really doing inside. The next day, while he was at work, I called a locksmith and had all my locks replaced, including the deadbolt on the garage door. I also asked the guy if he'd seen anyone request duplicate keys for my model. He said, "Not me, but a few blocks down there's a guy." Rickham, who ordered blanks a few months ago. He said he was helping his neighbor out. That was it. My hands went cold. Rick had copied my keys. And then it clicked. Why my electric usage was up before he ever plugged into my outlet. Why some of my tools had gone missing for days at a time. Why he always knew the perfect time to strike. He'd been sneaking in when I wasn't home, using my own power tools, running his side jobs out of my garage, and probably using my house to test his setups for those fake repair jobs. He'd been using me as a prop. But it got worse. I reached out to another neighbor, Bill, 2 houses down, who'd sold his place the year before after a series of code violations made it too stressful to stay. He told me he'd gotten fined repeatedly for safety issues that always started right after Rick had helped him out. And guess which contractor had fixed them? North Shore Renovations. Bill said he'd paid over $5,000 in fake repairs before giving up and moving to a rental. Rick had even offered to help him sell quickly through a local investor contact. The sale went through for dirt cheap. The buyer? A company partially owned by Rick's cousin. That's when I understood who I was dealing with. Rick wasn't some petty sociopath who liked to bother neighbors. He was building a small empire, one property at a time. Get a house flagged, drain the owner through fake repairs, force them to sell, flip it through a shell buyer, and repeat. Every accident, every petty act, every smirk was just business. And me? I'd been next in line. He hadn't just buried me in snow for fun. He'd been testing me, seeing how far he could push before I broke. If I cracked, if I left, my property would have been his next distressed asset. The part that made my stomach twist. The missing key. He hadn't taken it to steal stuff. He'd taken it to set me up. All those late-night electric spikes? He'd been running equipment in my garage to power tools for his scam jobs. That was why his stolen cord connected to my outlet. The outlet wasn't just stealing power, it was a cover. So I'd never suspect he'd already been using my house to commit his fraud. That realization made my hands shake. I wasn't dealing with a bully. I was dealing with a criminal who'd spent months turning my life into a setup for profit. The snow, the fine, the break-ins, it was all part of a business model. But if he'd been using my garage for his scams, then my tools, my space, my electricity, those were evidence. And evidence could be used to destroy him. So I made a new plan. Not just to expose him, to end him. I thought about storming his garage with a baseball bat. I even pictured hauling his contractor's van onto the lawn and torching it with a Molotov made from my regret. Then I remembered the rules I set back when this was just a grudge. No illegal traps, don't become the villain, use facts. So I stopped imagining and started assembling. First thing I did was the one I should have done months earlier. I went public, but in a way that could not be shrugged off as just a neighbor feud. I printed every frame of footage I had. The midnight plug-in, the inspector handing over the clipboard, Gary handing me a pre-filled estimate with Rick's name in the witness line, the picture of my living room on Rick's phone. I printed the usage spikes, the certified mail receipts, the key replacement invoice, and the messages from Bill about his $5,000 in fake repairs. I made a binder so thick it changed the weight of my hands. Then I walked into the city building during business hours and put the binder on the mayor's desk myself. I asked for the city's legal counsel and waited. Longer than I expected to wait, which was, in small ways, satisfying. When a staffer finally took the binder, she skimmed and said, "We'll look into it." I told her, calmly, that look into it wasn't enough and that I was taking it to anyone who would listen. I left a copy with the inspector's supervisor too, with a note that I expected a timeline for follow-up. I dropped another copy at the Gazette City desk and emailed the investigative reporter, whose pieces on local corruption had the bite of a dog that never let go. The reporter called within an hour and asked for everything, including the raw video files. I handed them over on a flash drive and watched, not without satisfaction, as he got visibly angrier while watching Rick sign the inspector's clipboard. The reporter did the thing I couldn't. He made it public in a way the city couldn't ignore. 2 days later, there was a front-page story with my photos and an interview. The wording was careful but damning. Possible collusion, alleged contractor racket. Investigation opened. Cameras from the local TV station pulled up the street. For the first time, Rick looked like the man from the footage and not the smirk. The city launched an internal investigation and froze the inspector's assignments pending review. The contractor's company license was suspended while the county checked invoices and permits. The real kicker: once investigators subpoenaed business records, they found a trail of cash payments and shell invoices tying Rick to several fixes on flagged homes. Bill's $5,000 suddenly mattered as part of a pattern, not just a grumpy neighbor's complaint. They served him with a notice: suspected fraud, tampering with municipal process, unlawful entry, and theft of utilities. The DA asked for my full testimony. Standing in that courtroom months later, notes in my hands, I watched Rick try to smile through cross-examination and see it fall away when the inspector's emails showed he'd written to Rick with the inspection time, and when Gary's bank records showed cash deposits timed to the days after citations. We won. He pled to a reduced set of charges, petty compared to what they could have been, because the evidence was so complete. The contractor company dissolved. The inspector lost his badge and was under state investigation. The city refunded me the fine, with an apology written on official letterhead that looked thinner than it felt. Bill got a settlement. Several neighbors who had moved away under pressure started talking to investigators. I didn't get their houses back, but I got them the truth. Revenge didn't look like the dramatic, violent fantasy I'd rehearsed. It looked like paperwork and persistence, reporters who cared more about the truth than about a good neighbor story, subpoenas, and a city that finally had to admit a problem. I spent nights replaying footage until the edges smoothed and the outrage turned into testimony. I lost sleep, but I didn't lose myself. On the last day Rick had any claim to my attention, I saw him moving a box into a moving truck with a woman I'd never seen before. He glanced over at my house, lips pressed thin. No smirk. He left the neighborhood, not with a look of triumph but with the kind of defeated, shuffling exit you give a bad role in a canceled show. I sat on my porch with a beer and let the winter sun cut through the trees. The cameras stayed, upgraded, legit, obvious. I kept the timer on the outlet, but I never used it again except as a reminder. Small people try to make money off other people's fear, and sometimes the smallest thing, a plugged-in cord, a camera, a neighbor with a thumb drive, becomes the thing that brings the house down. Closure wasn't a shout. It was the city calling to say the fine was reversed, the Gazette leaving a voicemail, "Great work." It was Bill texting a photo of his new rental key. "Thanks, man." That was enough. I still shovel my own driveway. I still throw the snow into the curb like everyone else. But sometimes, when I pass Rick's old driveway, I take the long way past the park and smile a little. There's a satisfaction to watching a man who thought he was a chess player realize he was only ever playing checkers. Kicker: if you're going to steal someone's power, don't also steal their patience.